Hello, welcome to the program. Ahead, 2GB's programming overhaul. Triple M launches The Grill. Today, FM's Kyle and Jackie O return to air. 7 wins the free-to-air ratings year. Pete Evans goes pink for Foxtel's W channel. And Time magazine celebrates 50 years of publishing in the South Pacific. All that and more coming up. But first, to the latest magazine and newspaper circulation and readership figures. Data for the June half from the Audit Bureau of Circulation saw 91 magazine titles post falls in sales compared to the same time last year, while 44 titles posted a rise. Now, looking at readership data from Roy Morgan, that saw total readers of the weekly certainly fall by 2.2%. Well, let's just have a look at the top 10 overall selling titles first. The Australian Women's Weekly remaining clear leader, but circulation did fall 7% from the same period last year, while Better Homes and Gardens closing the gap there on its rival monthly with a 10% lift in sales. Turning the page and just checking on the remainder of the top 10 selling titles, Superfood Ideas there seeing a fall of 12%, TV Week down 6%, Cosmopolitan fairly steady there. And the biggest circulation rises coming from Pacific Magazine's weekly Famous, which was up 20%. Bi-monthly title Diabetic Living up 18%. The biggest falls compared to the same period last year, well, the worst performer was AFL Record, down 25%. Just having a quick look at the readership numbers for June from Roy Morgan. Australian Women's Weekly most read as well as biggest selling, but readership did fall 14%. And Women's Day second most read, but also seeing a big fall there, while Better Homes and Gardens rose 2%. New Idea down 11%. The best readership rise in percentage terms was SA Motor up 50%. Recipes Plus there too, doing well, up 40%. And a quick check on Pacific Mag's Women's Health. There you see doing well, gaining by 36%. Among some of the falls, ACP's FHM down by 33% and New Weekly down 31%. Our co-host James Manning, editor and publisher of Mediaweek, is here to tell us what the numbers mean. And also, we are joined by Simon Davies, head of print at media agency OMD. Just looking, I guess, overall at what we were seeing, James, if we could start with you, what was your take on the numbers?
Yeah. A lot of the magazines seem to be sort of reaching a bottom. Year on year, the figures aren't great. Period on period, which is the numbers they were doing earlier this year, a lot of them look a lot stronger, which means there might be a bit of a turn in the market, things slightly on the rise.
And what are you seeing, Simon?
Yeah, I do agree with James that what we're sort of seeing is some period on period. It's not as bad. Year on year, it's still coming off fairly significantly, although within that there are still some sort of big success stories, and some of the ones you mentioned there, like sort of women's health, which continues to grow in a hot category.
Doing really well. Looking at the weeklies, obviously the most lucrative, I guess, part of the magazine sector. James, Women's Day, New Idea, what's going on there?
Yeah, they're continuing to tumble a bit. Then, they're slipping quickly. New Ideas sort of headed for sub 300,000, which is pretty amazing, isn't it? I think it might dip below that. Yeah. Some big changes, a lot of editorial appointments, some aggressive editorial coming out from the new editor, a new editor of New Idea expected soon. So that could help turn things around a little bit. What do you think, Simon?
Yeah, I think, once again, you look at the period on period numbers and you are seeing sort of some relative stability coming back there. If you kind of look back over 2 years, you've lost it's about just under 140,000 copy sales per week, and so I don't think we're going to sort of get back to levels where you go back to those previous historical levels. But certainly, I think there is a role and a demand for the big selling weeklies.
Things like Better Homes and Gardens. Still an amazing story, isn't it? Yep. Heading towards 400,000 copies, which is pretty incredible. You look, there's a graph, I think there's a graph of the weekly going down, and that keeps going, and it probably will. Better Homes and Gardens could become Australia's biggest selling magazine in a year or two.
We've been listening to
Mr. Savage.
I think obviously it is closing that gap, but there's still a very significant gap there. And I mean, Women's Weekly remains a phenomenal magazine, and you look at it on any of the sort of per capita measurements, and it does very well and the fact that we do have sort of a monthly that remains as the biggest selling title ahead of the weeklies, is still a fairly incredible result.
Yeah, and some significant appointments too at the weekly, a new editor coming on board very shortly, so they'll be hoping that's going to be spending some money there on rejuvenating the title, and not that it's been doing too badly lately. I guess they've had a few good covers. Were you surprised they switched the editor there?
Yes, certainly. What we were being told was that the magazine was going well, and all the contact we'd had with Robin was very positive. They'd talked very strongly about sort of particularly the Obama cover and the first Magda cover as being sort of sell-out issues. After that, to then come out with sort of an audit figure that is flat, kind of suggests that there were other issues there that were really doing pretty badly as well, which...
sort of the issues in between the good ones,
exactly. That it's probably a lot more up and down than perhaps had been suggested.
And of course this was the first read that we had to be able to compare Grazia as well. What did you make of that? The performance of Grazia?
Well, a lot of people just thought Grazia wouldn't work, full stop, but I mean, it's still in the 60s, isn't it? It seems to have found a niche there. I mean, there's some aggressive marketing. They're still doing a lot of discounting, half-price issues. They're doing a few double issues at the moment. What's your take on it?
I think Grazia came out into the market with a lot of hype around it, which is always hard because you then have to sort of live up to that, and probably, to be honest, it didn't. At the same time, I think if you look at the magazine now, it's a very different magazine to the magazine that they launched, and I think it is much better at doing the job that it has been set up to do. So, I would say we're more sort of positive about the title now, even though we may not be sort of at the initial sort of circulation numbers that were projected than we were sort of when we first saw the magazine.
What do you think is going to be the best way to be able to target readers in the future? Because there seems to be more magazines being launched. Is it going to be now that those niche magazines are going to be, where the growth is still seen? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's unlikely that we'll get sort of the mass title type launches because it's harder and harder to establish yourself in that market. There is very definitely still a role for the titles that deliver big numbers, and they're an important part of what we do in terms of talking to people. But increasingly it will become more segmented in the way that all other media are as well.
And just quickly, what do you think of the prevention launch, how it's going to go, of course, coming very soon, early September?
Yeah, I think it's going to do well. I mean, these titles, there's been successes at the recent launches going to a niche market have done very well, and ACP with Good Food, Top Gear, of course. Prevention, they put out this little sampler this week, 500,000 copies. You've got some ads in here from your clients, and you backing this? Do you think it'll do well?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, you look at the health category, and you've got men's health, you've got women's health, men's fitness, diabetic living, health smart, and good health in there, which are all sort of doing well. It's very much a hot category. You've got a market that is both an attractive market to advertisers and one that's being targeted by some big categories, particularly the beauty category. And you've got sort of a model that's been very successful overseas. So it ticks a lot of boxes, and we think it will do well.
All right. We might just quickly move on to the newspaper circulation and readership numbers now for June. To the national papers, and sales of the weekday Australian fell, but Saturday's sales were up. Circulation of both the AFR weekday and weekend editions were down. But then if you have a look at the readership data from Roy Morgan, it seemed to be the reverse, with the Australian down on weekdays, down 7% there, while the AFR saw a jump for both its daily and Saturday editions, readership numbers, that is. Well, let's get the views of James and Simon on what we're seeing in newspapers. Firstly, to the Australian, keeps growing. What do you think are the reasons behind that continued growth, Simon?
I think, there's a combination of things there. Probably primarily what it does is it has quite a unique offering in this market, that all the other newspapers are sort of more metro-centric, and there's limited opportunities to get sort of a national news delivery, which the Australian does.
It's good news for broadsheets, I guess. A lot of advertisers like seeing the ads. Bigger is better. The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald both holding up reasonably well, aren't they? There was talk, I mean, Fairfax had a plan. They were going to cut the size of the papers. That never eventuated. Are they still talking to you about, what they're thinking on that?
Certainly, in terms of what we're hearing, that has gone off the agenda currently, and there doesn't seem to be discussion around that. I think there's a combination of reasons for that. But yeah, it's not on the agenda at the moment.
Yeah, and part of the reason, I guess, is that advertisers would be expecting cheaper ads if the pages are smaller, and that would cut into their revenue. Does that have something to do with it?
Very definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think there's both a cost side of it in terms of actually implementing that. Although you get paper savings, it costs a significant amount to sort of change the way that the papers are printed, and also, yes, there's going to be sort of a loss of revenue as well, and it's balancing the experience, or offsetting all of those changes in cost.
Yeah. And just quickly on the tabloids, I guess that did pretty well. A couple of those always big selling ones like the Daily Telly and the Herald Sun, pretty steady there. Was that what you were seeing there? You think that's going to continue?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you look back over the last sort of 6 months, there's lots of doom and gloom headlines out there about newspapers, and we're really not seeing that in this market. I mean, you look at the UK figures particularly, and, it's pretty ugly, but here the numbers remain strong. On top of that, we've sort of just come through a period where we've had some big news agenda stories, and that's things like the Melbourne bushfires or the Queensland floods that I think have really sort of helped drive that news agenda and reflected in those sales results.
Does that make it a bit tricky for advertisers when it comes to rate negotiation for next year? I mean, the papers are going to be very bullish. Look, our figures are strong. Some of them are up a little bit. Does that...
I think that's all part of the fun of what we do, but...
So you try and put them up when the figures are down, so they've even got more of an argument now, when the figures might be up or steady.
I think the numbers are only part of the story.
Right.
The demand side of things is an equally and probably more powerful element, and actually what you're seeing at the moment is sort of a broader mix of media being used, and so a single medium doesn't have the same ability to sort of dictate its own pricing as perhaps it did in the past.
And just quickly, I guess, on that debate over charging for online news content, I mean, where do you sit on this? I mean, it's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, do you think it can work? I mean, does it have to work? We saw that report from PricewaterhouseCoopers saying that, media businesses need to look more towards consumer revenue, being consumer revenue driven rather than ad supported to be able to survive in the future.
Yeah. I think the newspaper model is essentially one that was based on scarcity. You're trying to apply that to a medium where scarcity isn't an issue. So I think in terms of general news, it would be very hard to get people to pay for content when you can go to another source and get, in a lot of cases, the same information at no cost.
But it's a bit dangerous to predict with any certainty, though, isn't it? Because
exactly.
How these things develop.
No one knows, which is part of why it's fun to discuss and debate. But certainly we would see sort of specialist or special interest type information as the areas that people are more likely to pay for rather than general information.
All right, just quickly moving on to some of the other news about in the sector as well. Time magazine announcing, having, of course, its 50-year anniversary of publishing in the South Pacific region. I think we've got a couple of covers of Time. And obviously putting out this Golden Anniversary edition as well, James.
Yeah, it's a bit ironic, isn't it, Simon? The magazine virtually pulled out of Australia with a special Australian edition last year. I mean, all the editorial staff were sacked, and they just moved. At the time, they said, look, times are tough, we need to make savings. We don't think people buy the magazine for local content, and it seemed to have proved right. Their figures are up quite nicely, aren't they, year on year?
Yeah, and yes, there is an irony in that, as you say, that they've pulled out of the market, sales have gone up. They're also doing a Australian 50th anniversary issue, which is being edited out of London rather than Australia. But yeah, it's a good result for them, and I think it's an interesting sort of adjunct to the discussion about newspapers that you're seeing a magazine like Time, or also The Monthly, which is another title which is showing good growth, sort of coming into the mix and sort of showing that there is that sort of ongoing demand for debate and information.
Just quickly to Reader's Digest, of course, in Australia saying business as usual, even though the US companies filed for bankruptcy protection. So obviously good news for
private equity business getting involved there at the wrong time, I think. Way too much debt, and they've just had to hand it over to the banks, really. But here they've got a little suite of magazines, haven't they? You mentioned Health Smart before.
Yep.
Got a magazine, a Handyman magazine. They're all doing reasonably well still.
Yeah, and I think certainly, as I say, Health Smart has been part of that sort of success of the health category, and Handyman has been another title that's been here at the right time, economy-wise.
Just quickly as well, just lastly, these reports of Fremantle's looking or wanting to get a MasterChef magazine up. Do you think that would work?
Look, certainly there's a lot of demand for food magazines. We've seen BBC Good Food launch into the market most recently, which is doing good solid numbers, so there's a lot of excitement around food. Assuming that the franchise continues to have life, then yes, I think there could be an opportunity there.
Yeah, and Australians have proven it. Look at the Better Homes and Gardens model, link with the TV show, it can work fantastically, So the link with the show there could do well for it.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Simon Davies, Head of Print at OMD. It's been great to have you in. Thanks so much for your time. And we are just going to take a very quick break, and then after that, on Media Week, we're going to be looking at all the news from the radio and television sectors. Welcome back. Regional radio and free-to-air TV owner Macquarie Media has booked a full-year loss, mostly due to a big write-down on its US business. The company thinks that the ad market here in Australia has bottomed. With the details, here's Chris Weston from IG Markets.
I mean, certainly this week we haven't seen too much life from the media sector. It's relatively flat, but that's in keeping with what we've seen in the broader market. The XJ or the Australian cash is also flat on the week. Today we've seen Macquarie Media come to the market, report their results. This is a stock that really hasn't taken part so much in the recent rally. They're flat year to date, where if you compare to the media sector, which is up 20% year to date, it just shows that people or traders are underinvested in this stock. And certainly if you look at the numbers, they seem to have quite a positive reaction from traders this morning. We saw it trade up to a high of $1.42, which is about 3.2% higher on the day. We've seen it come back a little bit there, so a little bit of profit taking going on in the market. If we look at top line revenue, we've seen growth there up 21% to $545 million. I think JP Morgan was looking for about $536 million, so certainly beating on the upside in terms of the top line revenue there. We did actually see them come out with a full year loss of $84.6 million compared to the profit they had last year of $277 million. But we did see a one-off impairment charge for its American consolidated media business there, which was, I think, for about $138 million. Their dividend they paid for 3.2 cents per share was largely expected by the market. They'd previously given guidance back in June, so this was priced into the stock. Now, if we actually look at the narrative, the outlook, which is positive, and also very key for a stock like Macquarie Media, it does seem to be quite positive. They did see the rate of decline in advertising spending seems to have slowed down, which is good. They expect to see advertising revenue pick up in full year 2010. Whilst it's not going to be as big as last year, they do believe that the first half of 2010 is going to be better than the second half of 2009, which is great. It shows that we're seeing a pick up there as well. We're also seeing their cash holding of $331 million, which is quite positive as well. But I think there's probably better companies at the moment who have better leverage to the recovery story in this sector. I think JP Morgan have got a neutral stance, which is testament just to that recovery play there. But the market seems to be liking the result. It was up 3%, but it's come back off those highs.
All right, a lot of news obviously coming from the radio sector this week. Let's get some more from James Manning. James, firstly to 2GB, a big overhaul. Of course, we've had Mark Noakes on the show. What's going on?
Yeah, Mark had a bit of a function this week and announced some new programming. He said it's been a reaction to, they went to all their advertisers and said, look, how can we get you more involved in the station? They said, look, if you a bit more programming that would appeal to baby boomers. 2GB's got an ageing audience, which he's talked about before. One of their challenges been to sort of get the station some younger viewers, so they're developing their off-peak time. In radio, off-peak's almost anything after breakfast, but 2GB is very strong across the day with people like Ray Hadley, Chris Smith, Jason Morrison. So they're opening up their weekends with some new programming. And it's not just a Sydney story. They will be syndicating a lot of this content, so it'll be cropping up in other markets, both around New South Wales and interstate if they get their way. New programs from people like Deborah Thomas from ACP magazines. She's been a long time editor there of various magazines. A health and wellbeing show on Saturday mornings, and guy John Paul Young, a lot of people will know the singer.
Yeah,
Has also got a background in Newcastle radio. People from up there will know him as a long-time host. He's doing a fishing show on Sunday evenings.
Great, there you go. And Alan Jones set to return soon.
Yeah, Alan Jones out of hospital, off on a bit of a vacation, holidaying with Reg Grundy in Bermuda. Taking some time off. He'll be back at the start of the next radio survey. It will be about mid-September.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Now, just looking into, of course, what's happened with Today FM, Kyle and Jackie O back on air this week as the investigation goes on into what happened. Well, certainly ACMA looking at whether
what
there's been a
happens
breach.
in radio when there's a complaint with something that's broadcast. People are told, look, first complain to the broadcaster, the station. A number of people did this. If people aren't happy with the response, then they go to the authority, which is ACMA. That's happened here, so ACMA's launched an investigation. We don't know a lot. Expect it'll take a long time. These things seem to drag on forever, so it'll probably this time next year or before we find out what's going to happen eventually, you know.
Right.
But that's what's going on there.
And just quickly as well, Triple M Sydney's new grill team having its first week on air. How'd they go, do you think?
It was a sort of fairly solid start. Nothing spectacular this week. The Triple M's had so many programs, they're not going to put high expectations on it early, although they say about that every show, and before you know it, it's out the back door if it doesn't work. But Hugh Jackman has figured prominently this week, so he's best mates with Gus Warland, is sort of the mainstay of the new program. They flogged Hugh heavily on Monday. On Tuesday, he finally turned up on Wednesday, and they made a lot out of that. But they've sort of played that card now, so they're going to have to find other things to talk about. Yeah. I know they were still on about Hugh Jackman a lot today, so I guess it might be next week before we find out what other stuff they're going to have on the show.
Now let's just talk about, because Harold Mitchell's been a guest on the show, and he's just one of a couple of books that are being put out from media people this week.
Harold's book I think it's an autobiography. He's sort of written it with Peter Wilmoth, a journalist from The Age in Melbourne. Living Large, Melbourne University Press, $50 out next week. A few other media books happen to be coming out at the same time. Mamma Mia, from journalist and editor Mia Friedman, long-time editor at ACP magazines. That's out. And also the big Vogue coffee table book. If you need a book for your coffee table, this is the one. 50 years of Australian style. Kirsty Clements and Lee Tulloch, and of course we had someone from Vogue in here the other week telling us about their anniversary.
Very stylish, lots of reading there. Just quickly as well, some news with regards to News Corp merging its Asian TV management as well. Some staff losses expected there?
Yeah, they're sort of decentralising and centralising at the same time, if you like. Star TV is going to be split into Star TV India and Star TV China. At the same time, they're sort of merging the back office functions. And they could be losing as many as 200 people in the next 12 months, which is about 30% of the total staff there.
And here at the Nine Network, there's been some new execs put on and one leaving.
Yeah, 2 new production executives. John McAvoy is leaving. David Mason is coming in. He's a strong production background, Mason. It's part of an acknowledgement that Nine needs to sort of regenerate, rework. They haven't had as much success as perhaps 7 and 10 have with a lot of their local productions, so they'll be wanting to rejuvenate their schedule big time for as people head into work out what they're going to be doing next year.
Let's just have a look through some of the ratings, James, and see what you think. This, of course, is week 33 of the ratings season. Free to air, top 10 first, 7's packed to the rafters, retaining number 1 spot. 7 News, 9 News, bit of a battle there on Sunday night, and 9's 2.5 Men, 5th most watched, always very popular.
It's a regular appearance, isn't it?
Better Homes and Gardens there, just moving up from 10th spot up to 6th this week, doing well there.
Yeah, always does well. Talking about Your Generation, only a couple of weeks to go before 10 brings in the replacement show, the Magda Sabansky, the Spearman experiment, that'll be filling that slot. They announced I think it's about the 2nd or 3rd Tuesday in September, but it's not far away.
And World's Strictest Parents, they're a big hit for Seven, hasn't it been?
Continuing to do very
And
well.
ABC, Spicks and Specs as well. James, just some other news as well from Free to Air. Christy Warner having her first night doing the newsreading gig on Rove.
Yeah, she ended up getting the job. The Rove sort of let that out of the bag last Friday. We thought it might have been Miff Warhurst, but I think they tested about 4 or 5 people, and Christy ended up getting the job. Interestingly, the daughter of Joan Warner, who's been a guest on the show here before, the Chief Executive of Commercial Radio Australia. But yeah, it's a clip of her on the first program.
There she was, yes. Now, just looking at the overall trend that you're seeing, Seven's won the year already, but we have to qualify this, don't we? Because there's obviously different measurements.
There's lots of different measures. You could win in certain demos, you know, win in certain time slots. Well, the first sort of victory of the year, if you like, is the number of weeks won. There's 40 survey weeks of the year. In total, people, Seven has now won 20 of them. So that means nobody else can win 20 weeks. So that's the first winner of the year. But there'll be other ones to come as their shares. People will be looking at audience shares in the different demos.
You're seeing 9 though ratings starting to.
There's a little uptick this week, if you like. They did very well on Sunday night. Monday they did quite well, won all the demographics. Tuesday still a bit of a worry for them, but it was still their best Tuesday. I think we worked it out was about the last 3 or 4 months. Even with a pretty ordinary lineup of programs. And last night they did quite well too.
Do you think this great Aussie cook-off, I mean, what's it going to be like, just quickly?
Yeah, a bit of a talk. It might have been a MasterChef challenger, you know, but it's actually a brand-funded program which is going to go into, I think it's a Saturday, it's a weekend afternoon slot anyway. So yeah, it's a different thing. It's a brand new media is the production house behind that, but it's not a prime time offering.
Let's have a look at the subscription TV ratings results for week 33 as well. And they see NRL, or 4 NRL games making the top 10 actually for Fox Sports 2, and the Ashes always a big draw there for Fox Sports 3. And Fox 8 having some wins there with The Simpsons and America's Next Top Model. James, interesting too, we saw Pete Evans, those special commercials starting to run on Foxtel's W channel in support of the breast cancer foundation.
They call it the O&O channels, the channels that Foxtel actually owns and operates, as well as all the other channels from independent operators across the. Yeah, he's done a series of ads to help raise awareness for the charity, and they started running this week.
Cooking as well, always popular.
Sure,
isn't
yeah, you can't go wrong with cooking these days, of course.
Exactly. All right, James, a very busy week. Thank you so much as always, James Manning, Mediaweek editor and publisher. That is all we have time for, though, from the team here. Thanks for your company.